This is The Recap, a weekly reflection on the sermons of Fellowship Baptist Church in Maineville, Ohio, seeking to help you make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. I'm your host this week, Ryan Land, and I'm here with the preacher of this week's sermon, Brent Wilson. Brent, welcome back.
What's up, man?
Had a little week off, and here we are, another week of The Recap, what we're calling Season 4 of The Recap. Can you believe that we're at Season 4 of The Recap?
I can't.
It's because the seasons are arbitrary and we just make them up. So it is kind of hard to believe.
Yeah.
It could be Season 6 next week. We just make them up. But that leads me into my intro question of the week. There was a debate on X, formerly known as Twitter, this week, that no show has a good Season 4. Can you think of a show that has a good Season 4? What is it? The last season? No, there's.
I think it's the last season. Or is there, can't remember. Lost definitely does not have a good Season 4.
I don't know. Lost was still pretty good in around Season 4, I feel like. I think it went 7 or 8.
Where it started going a little wonky.
2 is not Penny's Boat. Is that the end of Season 2?
I think
not
so.
Penny's Boat. That's the best season.
Season 4. I feel like 24 Season 4 is fine.
Yeah, 24 Season 4 is good.
Does Justified have a season?
It does have Season 4, and it's good.
Yeah. Is that
That is not my pick. I have one clear pick, but that's
for
not
a
for
solid
me.
Season 4?
Solid Season 4.
The West Wing Season 4.
That's
pretty good. Who said this on Twitter?
I don't know. It was just it was just a lot of people were arguing about it.
Okay.
Someone I didn't know said, no show has a good Season 4.
Okay.
And I think it was.
That's a strong stance to
I know.
take.
I think it was just kind of like one of those people that just like says whatever, just tries to get interactions, But you gotta solid like I know.
Let me hear your solid. Let me think.
Okay, so Season 4, it's their senior year. A new character is introduced. Her name is Lois Lane, and Smallville Season 4 is one of the best Season 4s.
Wow.
Of all time.
Okay.
So
I respect it.
They graduate from Smallville High. Clark develops some new powers in Season 4.
Okay.
The cast widens. Season 4. Man, excellent Season 4. Season 4 of Smallville. CW's hit show, Smallville.
Poldark Season 4 is good.
Never seen it. Never gotten that far.
I can't think of one Season 4 that stands out. It's hard. I'd have to kind of look it up. Because I kind of get lost. I'm binging, whatever, and you kind of get lost in what season, man?
Well, but maybe it'll be maybe by the end of this arbitrary season, it'll be the recap. The recap Season 4 will be the best one. So, two things. First, if you're watching the video podcast, hello, we're in a new location for at least the day. We're in the youth room with some LED panels behind us. We look very futuristic. I feel like, that's where we're at. If you're watching the video and you're like, why are they in a spaceship? We're actually just in the youth room. But we also, more importantly, have started a new sermon series through the Sermon on the Mount. And, we're going to be spending a lot of weeks going through the Sermon on the Mount. It's long. There's a lot of content. Mm-hmm. And so before we, dive into this week's sermon specifically, just talk to us a little bit about, why the Sermon on the Mount, why spend so much time going through it? Why is that important?
Honestly, it's a sermon series I have been pretty hesitant to do for a long time because it's pretty complicated. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of different ways to interpret the Sermon on the Mount, and I've always just kind of been like, it's kind of been like revelation to me. It's like, I don't know if I want to jump in that water, just because it takes a lot of study. And so over the past month, I've been reading a couple books and just kind of preparing for it and kind of started to feel a little more confident about it. And so one of the reasons it's so important to do is because it's like Jesus, it's not necessarily his only, but it's like one of the only like clear kind of sermons, long form communication that Jesus gives us. It's also important because it's kind of it's not necessarily the launch of his ministry, but it's very at the beginning of his ministry where he's kind of setting expectations, setting the scenes for the disciples and for anybody listening. This is who I am, what I'm about, what my kingdom is. Mm-hmm. So setting the stage there. We'll talk about this in a minute, but really setting himself up as like the fulfillment of Moses. Mm-hmm. And so it's important theologically. It's important kind of thematically or from a story perspective and the kind of the gospel narrative in those ways. For us, I think it's important just to hear kind of clear teaching from Jesus and understand, because like I said, the Sermon on the Mount can be super confusing, particularly like the Beatitudes. Like my wife was talking to me yesterday. She was like, when you said the thing about, I think it's the second Beatitude, blessed are those who mourn for they shall be comforted. She was like, my whole life, I've heard that at every funeral, and that's just what I've thought, without having really studied it. And so I think there's a lot of things in there that we just don't really know how to think about. There's lots of teaching. I think Turn the Other Cheek's in there, but
Salt and Light.
That's next week.
Yep.
Probably the most. I think. Tell me if you think I'm right about this. I think probably the most familiar part to us is the if you lust, you commit adultery in your heart.
Oh yeah.
Murder in your heart. You're angry. That's pretty. People know that.
Have you seen? Have you heard like there's all these like kind of sayings that come from the Sermon on the Mount that we use kind of like every day, like vernacularly. I gotta go find an example.
Oh, gotta Google it.
Yeah, I've got to Google it. Because someone pointed one. I think it was in the Jen Wilkin study that she does on the Sermon on the Mount. She points it out when it happens. And some of them are like, "Oh yeah." So I'm, gosh, I don't know if I can find one this quick.
Oh man, we'll have to bring it back next week.
Yeah, we'll bring it back.
We'll be in the sermon for a while.
Yeah, we'll bring it back. But it is. I'll have to go find it. That's so good.
Like common sayings.
Yeah, like stuff we just say all the time that comes from the Sermon on the Mount. Oh, another great thing Sermon on the Mount is like the Lord's Prayer. Right? Isn't that the Sermon on the Mount?
It is. And in the other gospel accounts, it's not.
Yeah.
But in this one, it is.
Yeah. And so just a lot of things we associate with like common sayings of Jesus come from these three chapters, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
And so, obviously it's important because it's, there's one thing we can learn from how Jesus lived, right? Stories about things he did, washing the disciples' feet, talking to the woman at the well, but there's something different about learning from what Jesus taught.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good skill to develop. And I think, another thing about interpreting the Sermon on the Mount is that it makes you not just a better reader of that section of scripture, but I also think it helps you read and apply, or like read, interpret, and apply the epistles, like in light of Jesus's teaching. It's like, because you got to think of all these guys as downstream from Jesus. Like he's the source of the teaching. And so when you're reading, 1st, 2nd Timothy, when you're reading 1st, 2nd Peter, when you're reading Revelation, when you're reading, all these epistles, like they're all downstream from, he's like the teacher of the teachers. It's like you're going to the source. And so I think that's really important about, as we look at the Sermon on the Mount, is to say, hey, this is where all, even Old Testament truth comes from. It's like, this is the teacher who's given us all truth, who's given us all knowledge, who's given us all wisdom. And so it's like straight from the horse's mouth. I don't think that came from the Sermon on the Mount. That's some common vernacular, but yeah, we're getting, right to the heart of the issue, right? To the core of the core, is here, is Jesus' teaching. So thinking about, we open with the Beatitudes. That's how the Sermon on the Mount opens. Another probably famous part of the Sermon on the Mount. Why are they called the Beatitudes?
Yeah.
I have zero idea.
Yeah. The Beatitudes, you're talking about kind of interesting way they start, and then I'll answer your question, but it almost seems like this kind of poetic beginning that we kind of read and like, oh, that's nice. And
that's
then you
cute.
Kind of move on.
Yeah.
Because if you don't really understand kind of what Jesus is doing, you don't really understand the content of them. But the reason they're called the Beatitudes is, as a lot of things that are in our vernacular today, is the Latin word for blessed is like the root of it is like beu. And so beatitude it just means the blessed blessings.
Does that have anything to do with the word attitude?
I don't think so.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, no, it's just like the the blessedness is like Beatitudes or something like that.
Oh, okay. It's so funny. I feel like it's always linked to
Attitude?
like your attitude.
Yeah. Nope, not. So really, it's just the Latin word that we've sort of Englishized, transliterated.
Yeah. Anglicized.
Anglicized to that. And so, yeah. That's one of the reasons, it's kind of a different conversation, but it's like these headings in the Bible can be helpful from like I'm looking for something. Oh, there's the Beatitudes or there's the
Lord's Prayer.
Whatever. Yeah, but it's like those are not inspired. Whoever did not put those
12th
there.
century, I think, is when they were added.
Yeah, and so and every Bible maybe have some different ones, you know.
It's probably, it's like the 12th century, those were added. They may have been added like in Latin.
Oh, yeah.
Like as they're, Catholic, medieval, they're reading everything in Latin. It's like, so we just like never translated that one. We just like Beatitudes or whatever.
Yeah. This is a rabbit trail we can't go down, but it's like the labeling of the prodigal son. I think it's like a super unhelpful
Wrong.
label.
Wrong.
It actually lends itself to causing us to misinterpret it because of this label someone else put on it.
I think the same thing about the I can't even remember what the real thing is because I don't call it that. But the parable of the four soils. Oh, the parable of the sower. That's what they call it. People think it's about the sower. It's not about the sower. It's about the soils. Yeah. Parable of the four soils. Yeah. So it is interesting how that changes your interpretive lens.
Yeah, it shapes it for sure.
Never even thought about that. So Beatitude just comes from the Latin for blessed. Well, or blessed. Did you ever get a firm answer?
No one said anything to me.
Right into the show. Why is it sometimes blessed and why is it sometimes blessed?
Yeah. My take is it's just poetic to say blessed.
Oh, see, my take is I'm gonna get creamed for this. Some people are gonna listen to this and be like, "Well, what about blah blah blah?" But it's like I think of it as like blessed is a verb. Like the Lord saw him and blessed him. Like that's blessed. And blessed is an adjective. Like so, blessed is the one.
It describes something.
Yeah, it describes them.
Can you think of a context in which the word you would say it blessed is not at the beginning of the sentence?
This is my blessed son.
Oh, okay. I couldn't think of that.
Yeah. But also when you're just trying to fit like poetically, you're just trying to fit like a rhythmic scheme. Yeah. Like you'll throw that little apostrophe over the ed so that you it's like, hey, this is actually 3 syllables. Or it's not just blessed, which is 1 syllable. It's blessed, which is 2 syllables.
Like, can you imagine singing "Blessed be your name, blessed be your name"?
No, but I think we should do it next week. Nathan should make an announcement. It's like, hey, we're actually all just going to say blessed instead of blessed. Blessed be your. That's terrible. Oh my gosh. Okay, well let's talk about blessed or about blessed. Okay. Because I think when we misinterpret or misunderstand the Beatitudes, I think it comes mostly down to this word, is blessed or blessed. Yep. And because we think, divine anytime we hear the word blessing or use the word blessing or blessed, we're thinking like God has been gracious to us. God has given us something. It's like moms posting on Facebook. It's like these are my blessings, right? And it's their kids, right? It's like kids are blessings
directly given
by God, right? Yeah. And so it's like we're direct divine blessing, right? God is giving you something, or like we say to someone's like, hey, thanks for that word of encouragement. That really blessed me, And so it's like receiving from someone. So what you said in the sermon that the Beatitudes, when we see blessed or blessed, that's not about like direct divine blessing. And so I kind of 2 questions. Why is it not that? And how can we know that it's not that?
One of the ways we can know it's not that is from the context. So I'm going to go in a minute down a rabbit trail, but the context actually tells us, like, think about the first 2 result in, because there's kind of this cause and effect, right? You do this, you get this. Well, the first and last one result in the kingdom of heaven. Like, if you do this, you get the kingdom of heaven. But then you have the one that, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. What's counter the gospel to say, if you do this, you get mercy from God, like you get salvation.
Yeah, okay. Can I pause you right there? So this is a really interesting, I think, and helpful interpretive tool for people to learn. And so it's like you read that, Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And what you just said is that, well, it's actually anti-gospel to say that, you give mercy to receive mercy. How do you know that?
From other parts of the Bible.
Yeah. And so it's like, we know from the truths of Scripture, from A to Z, that's not how it works. And so that can't be what Jesus is saying here. So we have to, it's like diagnose a little bit, like, so what does he mean? Because he can't mean go be really merciful and then God's going to be merciful to you. So just interesting.
Yeah, no, that's great. The interpretive principle, or what we'd call the hermeneutical principle, is we let the Bible interpret the Bible.
Yes.
And so if the Bible clearly says something somewhere else, and this one verse seems to say something different, we interpret that in light of the rest of the whole Scripture.
Yes.
So that's how we know, for one, like, these are not like tit for tat, cause and effect, I do this, God gives me this.
Yeah.
It's because of that context.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. It's like once your heart gets pure enough, it's just like you're like, I can see him. I can see God.
Another kind of hermeneutic thing there is, like, sometimes we always say, like, hey, do you interpret the Bible literally? And that's a little bit of a litmus test for some people of, like, do you think, are you a liberal or not about the Bible?
Yeah, theological liberal,
And it's like, well, we interpret the Bible literally where it's intended to be literal. But then when it's metaphorical or poetic or whatever else, it's like we interpret it.
Which is not scary, which is not,
no,
that's good.
That's good, yeah. We use the genre, the rules of that genre on it.
Yeah.
So, okay, so here's the rabbit hole of the other way we know this.
Okay.
So in the Old Testament, there are 2 Hebrew words for blessed. One is barakah, which is probably one most people are familiar with.
You wrote it here, and I'm just reading it on this document, and immediately I thought Baraka, which is a character in Mortal Kombat. I was like, blessed.
So barakah, which is
okay.
that, like, divine blessing, like we normally think of. And the other one, and I don't really know, I'm probably going to butcher how you're supposed to say this word in Hebrew, but it's like asrer.
No, I think you nailed it.
So you have these 2 words.
Hebrew people don't listen to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure it's way wrong. I semi-enjoyed Greek in seminary. I did not enjoy Hebrew.
Preach.
So these 2 Hebrew words. Well, I can't remember when, but at some point there was a Greek translation of the Old Testament done by a Jewish rabbi scholar kind of dudes. And so they're translating the Old Testament into Greek, from Hebrew into Greek. So when we look at that and you compare the Hebrew to the Greek, what often you see is with one Hebrew word, whatever, take a random word, it's often translated with multiple differing Greek words. It won't always be the same one.
Yeah.
However, that is not true with aser. It is always translate, or it is always
which is the Hebrew word,
which
for
is the
blessed.
Hebrew word for blessed. It's always translated into the Greek makairos. Okay. So one of the things we know about these 2 different Hebrew words is barakah is divine blessing, whereas aser, though can be translated blessed or blessing, is more accurately translated flourishing.
Okay.
And so when it's always translated, when it's put into Greek in the Old Testament, makairos, and then when you get to the New Testament and you get to the Beatitudes, and you see that the first word in Beatitudes is makairos.
Okay.
And so it's could be blessed. It's not necessarily wrong, but it's confusing when there's kind of a range of meaning in blessed, and so it's better translated flourishing or potentially happy.
Well, so one of the ways that this was taught to me at school was, it's like there's this quote, and I wish I knew who said it, but it's like, learning another language is like gaining another soul, because it's like there's this range of meaning that the original language captures that sometimes cannot be captured in English. And so, like, what biblical interpreters are not called to do is be like, yeah, well, we don't really have a word that's like one-to-one for that, so we're just going to make up a new word that we're going to teach everybody. Or it's like, we're just going to leave the Greek word there. It's like they have to find something that's close, right? And so I'm not trying to knock a biblical translation scholarship, because it's super hard. Yeah. But there are specific words, and I remember in class, our professor asked, like, anybody speak another language? And this person said to me, and it's like, what's a word in your language that you cannot describe. You cannot. There's no one-to-one. And so I think it was a student from Korea or something gave us a word, and so he like had her come write it up on the board, and he was like, okay, can you define it for us? And she was like, no. She was like, it's like joy, but it's like joy when you're excited. But there's also like this sort of like communal element about it. And so it's like she had to give a paragraph to describe what this one word meant. And he said, and he was specifically talking about the Sermon on the Mount. And he said, that's how makairos is. That's how blessed is. It's like, we just actually don't have a word that is accurate. And so like there's this word, you may see it at IKEA, like higa or hige, and it means like comforting, hospitable, like cozy, warm, like all these things. It's like, but it's one word, it's 4 letters or 5 letters. And it means all these things that it's more like an emotion that we use all these other words to describe.
Right.
And so blessed is the same way. And so it's not like we misinterpreted it. We should have interpreted it flourishing. It's like there's a range of meaning here, and maybe a better translation or a more accurate translation that's capturing the spirit of the word is flourishing.
It's interesting, a little side tangent. What you said about, you can't just use the Greek word here is 98% true, because I can think of 2 examples where we didn't actually give an English word. We just took the Greek word and made it an English word.
Like what?
Baptism.
Oh, baptizo.
Baptizo and deacon.
Oh, diakonos.
Diakonos. And so it's like you could translate baptizo as
I was thinking deacon.
To immerse.
But then you make all the Presbyterians mad.
That's what's funny. And so it's interesting. It's like this is one of those where I think your professor, the guy in the book I'm reading about it, would probably have said, "Hey, this is one of those that we could have done that."
I don't know if you would.
But a lot of reasons why that happened with those 2 words. But yeah, and so this is a word that this makairos is a word that not only does it carry not the divine blessing, but kind of this idea of flourishing. So it's not just a translation, like let's understand the word deeper. It also has some Greek philosophy roots. So Greek philosophy, they would have these kind of statements that we might look at and call them proverbs, but they kind of use a variation of makairos to call it, like, I can't remember how you say it, but it's like the noun.
Makairos verbs.
Yeah, that.
Never mind.
Yeah, and so Greek philosophy's aim was to take this philosophy and say this is what happiness is like for an individual, for society. And so whether you're looking at Stoicism, Epicureanism, hedonism, whatever,
Gnosticism,
they're all seeking to say, hey, this is the good life. This is what it means to be happy. This is what it means to be makairos, to be flourishing, to flourish. And so Jesus, when he is giving the Sermon on the Mount, particularly in the Beatitudes, he has got both his Jewish heritage in mind and also this Greek philosophy in mind, and is communicating it in that vein, saying, as a philosopher himself, this is the way to the good life. This is the way to true flourishing and true happiness. Yeah. It's not do this and God's going to bless you. It's not this like uber spiritual thing. It's actually more like, it's not like, hey, do this because God's commanding it. It's actually do this so that you can be happy. Yeah. It's a new philosophy.
You use the phrase, and I wrote this down in my notes during your sermon. It's like they're like kingdom proverbs. It's like we don't go read the book of Proverbs and say, "Oh, these are commands. We have to do these things." Yeah. It's just like, hey, if you want your life to be successful, if you want your life to be fulfilling, if you want to flourish, here's some principles for you to live by. Yeah. Which is what the Proverbs are, and kind of what Jesus is doing here.
Another example of this in the Bible is in the Old Testament, and I read at the beginning of the service, is Psalm chapter 1.
Oh, blessed is the man. Is that?
Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stands in the way of sinners, or sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is the law of the Lord. And, so it's like, it's not saying, blessed is the guy who just happens to do these things and God's going to give him blessing. It's saying the guy who does these things or doesn't do those things will find himself flourishing.
Interesting. I'm trying to see which blessed it's the is at the beginning of Psalm 1. It's
Asair or whatever.
Asair, yeah. The one that is translated Makairos.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Man, I wish you'd have said that when you'd read it. I'd have been hyped up. So I think that's important. You know what you're saying about it's like this is like a philosophy of life. It's not like a command. It comes back to genre. It's like this is a rule of life, right? That's these monks in the early days of the church. They would come up with these rules of life, right? The Benedict law, the rule is like the Benedictine monks that they would have these specific rules that they would live by. Their aim was holiness or righteousness, not necessarily flourishing. I think they were probably off on a couple things. But as a married man, I think the monks were off a little bit on their rules. But it's like I think it's helpful to think of them because this is like if you think of it as a command, like the pressure that lays on you.
Oh yeah,
is intense. Yeah, right. It's like I've got to be merciful and I've got to grieve my sin. I've got to be a peacemaker. And it's like this is like the it's like a little bit of a foreshadowing, I think. But it's like the 10 Commandments of the Christian life, right? The New Testament life. And so it's like we put all this pressure on ourselves, think of it as commands. I think it's just like overwhelming. Yeah. And not their intention.
Yeah. And I also think it's really interesting, we don't study philosophy really as a society anymore. And because of that, when we talk about Jesus as a philosopher, it doesn't really resonate with us. But Jesus, I think in many ways, it's coming less as some new religious teacher, and it's coming as the truest philosopher, saying, hey, I'm going to speak truth to the whole world. About the whole world, about every aspect of the world, and to tell you the way that to enter the good life. It's not through stoicism, where purge all of your emotions. It's not through hedonism, do whatever makes you happy. It's through me and through these ways, and that's why one of the reasons I called it kingdom culture is because it's like it's not rules like you were just saying. This is how our family operates. This is just, it's a feeling, it's a vibe.
It's the vibe,
It's the vibe of the kingdom of God.
This is Jesus's vibe check. That's how you would say it to Gen Z people. Right, Josh? He said yes. You can't see him.
Yeah. And so Jesus coming as a philosopher, telling us about the good life.
Yeah, and giving us, and it's not the family rules, but it's almost like the principles, right? Or there's this family that Darcy knows, and I wish I could remember it. And I wish I could remember their last name. I'm just going to say the Smiths, but it's like one of their things is like the Smiths help. It's like, it's not a rule, but they have just like this family code. Yeah. And it's like, that's one of the things. It's like, we are helpers.
Sometimes you might go to someone's house or someone, like I'll tell you, we had Mike Newman, who's the pastor at
The Gathering
over here, not across the street, but just to the side.
Just down the street.
And they came over to our house for dinner years ago, and the culture that they brought with them, with him and all of his girls, you could feel it. And the way they spoke, the kindness, the way that they helped clean up. And I'm like, no, you don't have to help us clean. And they're like, no. And they're washing dishes and all this stuff. And it's just like, you can tell the culture of their home is different than other people's. And it's like, in the same way, Jesus is trying to paint for us a picture, the culture of his family that he's inviting you into.
And like, I think this is a little bit of a sidebar, but it's like the evangelistic tool that is. It's like, because someone comes in your home and acts like that, that's the culture of their family. Like, that's infectious. Like, you're like, I want my kids to do those things. I want to act and speak to my kids that way. It's like, that's infectious. And so it's like, Jesus is not just saying like, hey, do this and we're all going to be kosher, but it's just like Jewish. But he's saying, hey, do this and your life will be better. And then, and as we're going to see like later on in the sermon, it's like, that's going to be really important about what he has to say about being salt, about being light. It's like, it's important that people see our culture and how we live and how they can become a part of it. So talk to us a little bit about like there's sort of a linear or almost like a building upon or something in the Beatitudes. Is the order important? What would you say?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say authoritatively if this is intentional by Jesus or not.
I'm gonna go ahead and say it was.
Okay,
because he said it that way.
Well, yeah. What I'm gonna say, I don't know.
It wasn't an accident.
No, I know his order is intentional. What I'm deriving from it.
Okay.
So, to me, it appears like the progression of salvation. You start with a realization that you are in spiritual need. You're poor in spirit. You then move to a place of grief over your sin. You then move to the place of submission to Christ. You then move to the place, I'm going to see if I can get the order of them right, of wanting to be righteous. Right? So now you're saved, right? So you've confessed your sin. Hey, I'm in need. I've confessed my sin. I've bowed my knees to Jesus. And now I'm being sanctified. And I'm seeking righteousness. And then those others are kind of in that vein as well. It's like, okay, I'm trying to be pure in heart. I've received mercy. I'm trying to show mercy. And then it ends with, and I'm trying to be a peacemaker. And then it ends with, because I've identified with Jesus, like these are the things that are going to happen to me. And so to me, it just feels like the progression of the salvation, not just justification, but like justification, sanctification, and like the Christian life. We start here, and does that make sense? What I'm saying?
No, I see the pattern. When you first said that, I was kind of like, I don't know. And then as you explained it, I was like, no, that I actually think that pattern is at least there.
Yeah.
It's like I think that would be helpful to explain to someone. And so I do. I do see that. It's like, and I think it's a helpful diagnostic. It's like, well, which one of these do I find is the most difficult?
Yeah.
It's like if it's that if you find it difficult to say you're in spiritual need, like like you may need to start evaluating some things, thinking about things and your relationship, with the Lord and His holiness and your sinfulness, But if you're like got no brokenness over your sin, it's like, hey, here's kind of where to go.
Yeah.
And so I do see that, and I do see a helpful, kind of diagnostic in that to be able to say, here's the ones I'm weak at, and here's where I want to go. So I think that's helpful. Last thing, just kind of about the Beatitudes themselves, and really this is more about the Sermon on the Mount as a whole. But we just came off this Moses sermon series,
which was super intentional.
Yeah, very intentional. We've been planning this for years.
Yeah.
But you have this, the iconic moment of Moses' life is coming down the mountain with the Ten Commandments. Yeah. And now you have, not Moses, you have Jesus on the mountain, the Sermon on the Mountain, giving these ways of living, giving these principles. And so talk to us about how those are connected, how the Sermon on the Mount is like imaging Moses, then ultimately like how Jesus is like the fulfillment, the true and better Moses, as Tim Keller would say.
The thing we would say, first of all, is that Jesus is the fulfillment of the entire Old Testament. All the promises of God, all of the shadows, all of the longings are pointing to Jesus. And so we know this is true. So even when we're looking at it, we go, okay, how is this true? Well, the first thing you see is there are so many similarities between the life of Jesus and the life of Moses. Both of their births are surrounded by the slaughter of the unborn or the young. All the babies are dying in both places. Both of them flee their home and then return. The book of Hebrews describes Moses and the Israelites crossing the Red Sea as they were baptized. Jesus, baptized. Both are involving the Jordan River at some point. And then both
temptation
in the wilderness for 40 years and 40 days. Super intentional. And then both go onto a mountain and bring a revelation from God, a teaching from God. And there's probably some more I've forgotten about, but all these similarities. And so it's, if you're looking from a biblical meta-narrative, big picture position, you go, okay, this is not a coincidence. And you really know that when you read Matthew, because in Matthew chapter 2, which same book the Sermon on the Mount is in, Matthew says, so Jesus has fled his home. He's gone to Egypt. And when an angel comes and says, "Hey, it's safe to come back now. Herod's already killed everybody. You're safe." He quotes, I believe it's Habakkuk, and he says,
"Out of Egypt,
I called my son." Now, when Habakkuk wrote that, he was talking about Israel fleeing Egypt in the Exodus. But he says, Habakkuk or Matthew is saying what Habakkuk didn't fully realize was that he was talking about Jesus, who one day, thousands of years later, would also come up out of Egypt.
Yeah.
And out of Egypt I called my son. And so Matthew is telling us, no, this whole Moses and children of Israel coming up out of the Exodus is about Jesus. It's a picturing of that. And so we see that Jesus is the true and better Moses. He is the substance of which Moses was the shadow pointing to Jesus.
Yeah.
And so what Moses did, both in the Exodus of think about how he's redeeming the people out of slavery. Well, Jesus has come to do the second Exodus, the greater Exodus, the saving people out of a greater slavery, not from physical chains, but from the chains of sin. Moses brings a law that is very much do this and live. Don't do this and be cursed. And Jesus is coming to bring a new law that's in some ways we're going to see is actually harder, but it's also him telling us the path to flourishing.
Yeah.
And it's not just obey the law, it's in him. And so he's both revelator, prophet, and redeemer, bringing this law. And so he is, when you read the very first verse or two of Matthew, and I got to pull it up, in Matthew 5, he says, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain. And when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, commentators talk about this, and they say, there's some other times where Jesus does something similar. He gets away from the crowds. He gets on a boat, right, so that he can get some distance. But they kind of make that the point of that. In this, Matthew is intentionally bringing that mountain language up and saying that he went up it. Not just to get away from everybody to get some distance, but to identify himself with Moses. So one of the things that's interesting too is like why do we call it the Sermon on the Mount? Why is his head in here? It's not because Jesus called it that, but Augustine.
And thus ends the Sermon on the Mount. He said it. He said the title of the movie.
But Augustine, in like 400 AD, so pretty early after, calls it that for the first time.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and so
shout out my boy Augustine.
Not Augustine.
No,
Augustine.
That's the city in Florida.
That's right. So all of that to say, Jesus is stepping in and saying, "Hey, Moses brought you a philosophy, but it was but a piece of the puzzle, and everything that he did from beginning to end was shadowing what was to come in me. And I'm here bringing you the substance, the real thing." So
Amen. Yes and amen. That's all I have to add to that. It's so amazing. Well, any final thoughts about the Sermon on the Mount? Any about the Beatitudes particularly? What's your favorite Beatitude?
Oh gosh. Well, what I'll say, maybe the one that was, I don't know, most interesting, was pretty interesting to me, was the peacekeeping one.
That's the one I was going to say.
Or peacemaking, I guess. And particularly because I have a lot of people in my life who I think, whether they would use that language or not, see themselves as a peacemaker, but really are conflict avoiders.
Oh yeah, I thought that was really helpful.
And I love my mom, but this is my mom. When we come home for Thanksgiving or whatever, she just wants everyone.
Oh, I thought you were talking about my mom when you said that thing about it's like don't talk about X, Y, or Z. Like that's what my mom says.
Oh yeah, yeah. My mom was like, she wants everything to be smooth, no one to fight, and she just wants this perfect thing with all of her kids and grandkids there. And so let's avoid all the conflict. And it's like, well, I mean, I get it, but that's not peacemaking. That's just avoiding the issues. I
don't think there's a better virtue that Christians can be called to in 2024 than being peacekeepers. It's like I think that's often neglect, especially kind of in our circles, like sort of like the young restless reformed kind of circles is kind of like we kind of like Paul, like who's like kind of taking it to people.
We like angry
and rebuking people and telling them how right he is and giving all this theology and all this theological smackdown to people. It's like he's going to Peter and be like, I rebuked him to his face, in Galatians 2, and we love that stuff. And then we're like, the turn the other cheek, like be peacemaker. That's good. We like that.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I really want to go rebuke someone to their face.
Yeah.
And so it's like I feel that pull. And so to be a peacemaker, I think is a big challenge, and not to be one that just avoids the conflict, but that, like Jesus does, wades into the mess, and tries to bring order, kindness, compassion, empathy.
Which I would say the other one I really enjoyed kind of thinking about was the meek one, because we don't understand meekness; we think it's weakness. But just
because they rhyme.
Yeah. But flipping it on its head to say, and my wife said this a while back, and I thought it was really fascinating that, we talk about strong-willed kids.
This is so good. I've heard her say this.
With strong-willed, I just got this kid. They're just so strong-willed. It's actually the opposite. They actually are weak-willed. They cannot control their passions. Their wills are subject to their passions, and their will are not strong enough to control their urges. And so they're actually weak-willed. And in the same way, meekness is to actually be strong-willed, which is a good thing. The opposite of meekness is weak-willed. I'm controlled by my passions. So meekness is the ability to restrain oneself, even when I'm offended, even when I'm hurt, even when I'm injured or
don't want to do the thing, right? Like a child.
I can control myself.
Yeah, that's good. We got one question. So you use this Dallas Willard quote. And I'll read the whole quote and then I'll read the question. But so here's what Dallas Willard said. Someone asked him how he would define a mature Christian, and he replied, I think a mature Christian is someone who is very difficult to offend. So you use that very difficult to offend language. And so this person writes in and asks, please expound on the concept that Christians should be the hardest to offend and stir up. There are many things to be stirred up by in our society, late-term abortion, for example. How then are we to be?
I think this is a really helpful question, and I wish I had time in the sermon to had gone more into this. I think part of the issue in this question is a defining of terms. Oftentimes our disagreements come around. We're using a word and we're using a word differently. So offend, I don't think is actually the right word here when you're talking about late-term abortion. Or anything that we would be morally opposed to. When someone goes and is advocating for abortion, I should not be personally offended. What I should be is grieved, maybe even righteously angry. You think about sex trafficking. It's like we should rightly be angry at this grave injustice in the world, and so we're not offended by it. Offended means you have personally hurt me as an individual and hurt my feelings. You've done something to upset me. And so it's the wrong word. And so when I say offend, I mean, like, sometimes people will say, like, they'll put some like LGBTQ agenda in a movie, and someone's like, man, I'm just so offended by that. And it's like, well, they weren't thinking about you when they made this movie. You should not be offended by that. They're unbelievers with a lost agenda. Like that's what do you expect from lost people? Like you should not expect anything different. And so instead of being offended by it, we should be grieved over it. And so I think that's a difference. And I think it's a difference that matters. And so the things that, we shouldn't get necessarily so hurt and then upset about these things that maybe we see online or whatever that people are pushing. It's
let me give you an example.
Okay, yeah, go.
And see how you would deal with this. The Last Supper thing in the Olympics.
Man, this was wild.
So they've got they're obviously doing the Last Supper, and they've admitted that they were doing the Last Supper, but it's all these, men in drag and, transgender people. And so people were, I think, pretty offended by it and were posting about how offensive it was and how they offended millions of Christians. So should we be offended by things like that?
Offended's the wrong word because they're not doing it to me. And Jesus is a big boy who can he not hurt. Well, but what I think the right response should be is to weep. to look at these people. And in one sense, this one's a little complicated because it's like a piece of art. I mean, it is about Jesus, but it's got some layers to it. Yeah. But instead of like, oh, I can't believe they would do that, it's like, oh man, how sad.
Yeah. The world's lost.
The world's broken.
Yeah. I also think, there's a level at which you say, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake.
Yeah.
It's like, I think that's a part of the Willard quote is it's just a little bit kind of like, what do you expect? Yeah. It's like you said in your sermon, like what Jesus promises over and over and over again is not health, wealth, and success.
Yeah.
It's persecution.
Yep.
And so it's like when we're persecuted, it's kind of like,
and I think
it's not offensive. You're just fulfilling the words of Jesus.
And I think part of the problem is we've come out of this Christian culture. In America or in the West, where everything like revered those things, and we've come out of that now, and so we don't know really
even non-religious people,
and so we don't really know how to handle that, and I think part of the reason that we need to not be offended is like, guys, they can, no matter what they say, no matter what mockery they put on,
doesn't actually change anything.
It doesn't change anything. Does it hurt? I mean, like it does. I mean, and this isn't new. Think about how they mocked in the Colosseum. Yeah.
Well, it's like, one of the first instances of the word Christian we have, I think this is true, is there's some graffiti on that we have found like historical like record of. There's some graffiti of that was done over a Roman centurion's bed of Jesus on the cross, and he has like a donkey's head.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it talks about here, the guy's name is like serving or bowing to, or it says about him being a Christian.
Yeah.
It's like there's this like icon of Jesus on the cross, but his head is a donkey. There's another word for donkey that they're, you could fill in the blank. That's what they're referencing. And so, like,
so this is not new.
Yeah.
And it's just like, hey, instead of being outraged, like somehow these people have attacked me and hurt me, it's like, guys, I'm actually unfazed. It didn't hurt me one bit. You didn't lower my view of my Savior one bit. And so it's like, actually, I'm just sad for you and grieved for you and grieved that maybe you've done this or grieved at this injustice in the world, whatever that is. And not offended.
Yeah.
Sad and grieved. And so that, we talk about peacemaking, it's like when we respond that way, the world doesn't see it's like, oh man, these Christians got upset again about the thing that we did. They didn't get upset when the Simpsons portrayed the Last Supper,
or the Sopranos,
or Battlestar Galactica, or the millions of other shows that have done this exact same thing. Side note, but instead of us getting offended, it's like actually we were just the culture that we put forward wasn't one of outrage over the skit they did, but was one of you're missing it, guys.
Yeah,
let me show you the real way.
Yeah, and I think there's like a level of meekness. You talk about the peacemaking, but it's like it's like these like it's easy to live these in the Christian, live out the Beatitudes in the Christian culture. It's like that's not what Jesus was calling people to do. There was no Christian culture; it didn't exist.
Yeah, he's going to say here in a little bit, get punched in the right cheek and turn to your left.
Yeah,
and I think that's hard for us because we're used to having power, and Jesus doesn't call us to wield power. But to lay it down. And his kingdom doesn't advance through power, political or otherwise. His kingdom advances through weakness, through a message of a crucified and risen Savior.
Yeah. That's a good word to end on. Thanks for joining us for the recap this week. We hope this conversation has encouraged you to keep striving to make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. If you aren't part of our church family, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning. We gather for worship at 10:30 a.m. For more information, you can always go to myfellowship.church. Thanks for listening. Be blessed.